There's this strange parallel between Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Fall of the House of Usher, and the game What Remains of Edith Finch, that I don't know if it's evident to everyone familiar with Poe's work if they recognize it, or if I'm just grasping at straws when thinking about the two. Both the story and the game have this similar concept of a curse that may be a self-inflicted, self-fulfilling prophecy, or it could be guided by the hands of a supernatural force. Whether or not this concept is evident amongst both fans or not, I'm going to talk about it here since it's been on my mind recently. Welcome to Lord Pog Gaming. I'm Lord Pog, and I'm honored that you're here. This is one of my psychology and gaming videos, where I look at games through a psychological lens. And if you like this sort of thing, you can find more under the Psychology and Gaming playlist on the channel. Don't forget to give the like button a gentle high five, as it helps the channel, and if you're new here, I'd be totally honored if you'd subscribe.
Totally?
Ring my bell for notifications, and sign my guest book to appease the YouTube god known as the algorithm. My guest book is what I call my comment section. Feel free to sign it, letting me know what you think of the video. The best way to describe what I've noticed about the connection, if not a canon one, between the House of Usher and Edith Finch is by first taking a closer look at the characters of both. I know that What Remains of Edith Finch has double the cast of The Fall of the House of Usher, so some characters may only be mentioned briefly, if at all, when talking about it. Also, I know that Netflix did a miniseries on The Fall of the House of Usher, but we'll not use that for any reference to what I'm speaking about here. It's an okay show, watch it if you want, but you're not missing anything if you don't. The mom on that who gets melted by acid? Ugh. Netflix did the typical modern trope and tried to make her a sympathetic character, yet she's pathetic, more than sympathetic. But I digress. When looking at the two main protagonists of Usher and Finch, their introductions are similar in scope, if not one-to-one the same. Both the nameless narrator in the House of Usher and the nameless visitor in Edith Finch have been summoned to a mysterious place. While the nameless narrator is arriving to visit his dear friend Roderick Usher, who has fallen ill, and so the narrator's reason for being there isn't so mysterious, the nameless visitor in Edith Finch isn't as aware of their reason for visiting their ancestral home. Yet, there are revelations to be had for both the protagonists and the audience. From here on out, I'm going to be spoiling both The Fall of the House of Usher and What Remains of Edith Finch. So if any of you haven't read the story or played the game, I suggest going and doing that before continuing on in this video. I especially recommend reading anything written by Edgar Allan Poe. Heck, I recommend reading in general.
Read a fucking book for once.
What Remains of Edith Finch has many layers to its narrative, both visually and story-wise. While at the start of the game, the player is introduced to the protagonist taking a ferry ride to their family home. They will not be seen again until the end of the game. It's a story that's told from the perspective of the protagonist, reading about the perspective of their mother, reading about the perspective of their mother, Edith.
Oh no, I've gone cross-eyed.
I think. Who experiences the perspectives of their deceased family members is Edith. That's a lot to take in, I know, but it's the final reveal that the player is already playing 3 generations, or is it 2? I don't know. That stuff always confuses me. 2 or 3 generations from the character telling the story is what makes What Remains of Edith Finch so ambiguous in its whole cursed bloodline arc to begin with. The Fall of the House of Usher might not have as many layers in that regard, but to say it isn't layered would be an injustice to its subtle gothic horror narrative. Yes, the reader only follows one character around as they explain their slow descent into madness, but the layers of what they are telling the reader is where said layers begin to fold in upon the mind. As the perspective of the nameless narrative shifts and begins to bend with each passing day while within the House of Usher, this also leads to the ambiguity of a supernatural curse by the story's end. One major aspect of both is their ancestral homes, which are almost characters in of themselves. The House of Usher is recognizable by its cracked foundations and haunted appearance, the Ushers being shut-ins and incestuous.
What did he say?
There's a nod to the idea that their curse has affected the house, and as such, the house reflects this. It's full of secret chambers, dark corridors, and a crypt even. While the Finches have two homes to speak of, with the first being of note is the one explored in the game. It reflects the curse of the Finches as well, but in a much different way. The Finches, while not shut-ins or incest, their house shows how stubborn they have become. Floors and rooms have been added to the home, making it look like a set of child's building blocks, as when new members of the family are either born or added through marriage, new additions are created instead of given by allowing the new family members to live in the rooms that have long since been abandoned. It too is full of secret passages, but acts as more of the crypt in its entirety, as opposed to having a singular designated space for the crypt. The first actual Finch home seems to share more similarities with the Usher house in terms of being a more physical representation of the respected family curses. Odin Finch, the eldest Finch mentioned in the game, sailed from Norway to America in 1937, bringing along his actual family home with him. It's mentioned that even before the events of the game, that the Finches were already suffering from a curse, and that Odin thought he could outrun it by sailing to America. Before he could reach the shores of the States, however, he and his ancestral home would wreck off the shores of Washington. Odin would be lost, and the home would sink. And on a side note, I just want to mention just how much of a unit Odin Finch must have been in life. I mean, I've heard of people moving their entire homes by semi-truck and trailer across the country, but to move your entire home across the sea to an entirely new country?
Damn!
No wonder he was named after the All-Father of Norse mythology. The man was on another level. Anyway, the first Finch home is more of a better representation that falls in line with the Usher home over the one explored in the actual game. While yes, the player sees more of the house that is precariously stacked like a house of cards waiting to fall, in its own right, it represents the crypt in the final act of the House of Usher, while the drowned Finch home is the actual true representation of the Finch curse. Much like the nameless narrator sees of the Usher home at the beginning of the House of Usher, the first Finch home sits sunken just off the Washington coast, and when the tide is low, it can be seen. It's in disrepair as a result of having been sitting in the ocean for decades, and perfectly exemplifies the sunken state of the Finch family. The longer our nameless narrator stays with Roderick Usher inside his home, the more the aura of the Usher curse begins to change him, much like it has the house. At first, he's there to comfort Roderick in his time of need, staying in a state of disbelief about all this cursed nonsense. As time goes by, though, the narrator begins to see and experience things much in the same way Roderick is, almost as if the curse is rubbing off on the narrator, infecting him with its brand of madness.
This is a bummer, man.
The narrator starts to buy into the idea of a sort of hereditary evil or curse that is affecting the Usher family. Yet Roderick refutes this by saying that it is the house that is cursed, not his family, despite their questionable life choices, of course. What Remains of Edith Finch echoes this idea with the eldest Finch in the game, Grandma Edith, who has the same name as the narrator, so for the sake of confusion, we'll call her Grandma Edie from here on out. Grandma Edie refuses to leave the Finch home, despite all the tragedy that has occurred there. And there's a lot. When I likened the Finch home to the Usher home's crypt, that's because it is. At least 13 of the Finch family have died within or around the property of the Finch estate. I could be off on that number, but not by much. And then there's Milton Finch, who disappears in Edith Finch and returns in another game called The Unfinished Swan.
But wait, there's more.
Also, Lewis Finch perishes at his job, not in or around the Finch home, just to clarify. Dawn Finch, the mother of Edith Finch, who the game is actually named after and is narrating the story, also leaves the family home and perishes elsewhere. But it's her relationship to Grandma Edie that best shows the connection to Roderick Usher and the nameless narrator of The Fall of the House of Usher. Both Dawn and the nameless narrator try to do what they believe is best for Roderick and Grandma Edie, with Dawn trying to convince her grandma to leave the house. The nameless narrator tries to keep Roderick in high spirits by reading and listening to music, as a sort of way of taking his mind off his issues and the curse. There's a question to if what the nameless narrator is doing is the right choice, as opposed to just urging Roderick to leave the house. Yet when looking at this under the lens of time, The Fall of the House of Usher was written in, moving from one home to another was more inconvenient than it is now, if you can believe it, considering what the housing market is like. Still, when taking into account the fact that the Ushers are known shut-ins, the idea that they would have multiple homes in different locations is slim, and moving in those days required practically refurbishing the new location, unless one possessed very little to start with. So one would either have to be a minimalist or wealthy enough to have all new stuff to fill their multiple homes with. There was no such thing as a U-Haul back then, and what the wealthy did take with them needed to be able to be carried on a carriage. It would require great expense and even danger from bandits to rent several carriages to haul lots of things from one location to another. It could be done, but it wasn't the smartest or cheapest option. Imagine, it was actually cheaper to own very little or buy all new stuff when moving. The very thought blows my mind. Keeping all that in mind though, the nameless narrator is doing what a good friend could hope to do in that sort of situation. Even if he did suggest leaving the home that Roderick believes is cursed, from what information the reader is given about the Ushers, it would have fallen on deaf ears. Because of the Ushers' lifestyle, generations of Ushers have lived and died in that home, and Roderick doesn't appear to have any plans on changing the status quo. Roderick even has a belief that he and the house are tied together in some symbiotic fashion, going as far as to not even having left its walls in years. Dawn Finch, much in the same way, deals with a similar problem in What Remains of Edith Finch. Grandma Edie refuses to leave the Finch home, even though Dawn protests that they should, making it a point of contention between the two. Grandma Edie, like Roderick, believes in the curse and accepts it. Only it's Dawn this time who believes that the house in of itself is the actual curse. Dawn's whole argument is that the house is just a reminder of what they've lost, and that their curse could be lifted if they would just leave it behind. Much in the same way Odin believed when he set sail from Norway, save for Dawn doesn't want to bring an entire house with them like that unit Odin did. Both our nameless narrator and Dawn escape with their lives intact. To say that the idea of a supernatural curse hasn't changed their outlook on the prospect of there even being a curse, that would be a stretch. The nameless narrator watches in horror as the Usher home sinks into a swamp.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over. What the fuck are we gonna do now?
While Dawn, after leaving the Finch home, never stays in one place for too long. She's continuously moving from one place to another, as if she's trying to outrun death itself, much like Odin did. We never learn of what happens to the nameless narrator after his ordeal with Roderick, but we do learn that Dawn Finch eventually becomes ill with a sickness that is never specified, yet I would guess it's some type of cancer, and she finally succumbs to it, showing the player that perhaps it wasn't the house causing the Finch's issues all along. Just like if Roderick had chosen to break the cycle of his family's superstitious ways, then perhaps things might have ended better for him also. While there is plenty in both the House of Usher and Edith Finch that could point to something supernatural afflicting these families, a keen reader and player can also explain away most of it to be what some call a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It means that I, like God, do not play with dice and do not believe in coincidence.
More so in Edith Finch than House of Usher, although that's mostly because of the subtlety of Poe's story, and a basic lack of knowledge of the time frame the story takes place in by modern readers. In the time Poe wrote The Fall of the House of Usher, most readers would have had an easier time picking up on the clues he was leaving. As stated earlier, the Ushers are shut-ins and only take other family members as mates, which medically leads to mental deficiencies in the offspring of those kinds of unions.
Hold up, wait a minute.
Allowing the reader to deduce that Roderick might have a slight case of Down syndrome. Having not left his house in years also can lead to health issues and social impairments within society as a whole. Hence the term, go touch grass. People are not meant to be isolated. They need interaction with the greater world around them, if nothing else, than to confirm that sometimes whatever mental hypothesis they have developed are either correct or incorrect. Pair that with the benefits of the natural vitamins given to them by the sun's rays, within reason of course, and just what you get from fresh air. Denying oneself of those things can cause development issues, both mentally and physically. And I know there are some who have health issues that these things can actually do the opposite for, hence those people who have to live in plastic chambers because they have immunity risks. I would say those are the exception to the rule, and the exception to the rule doesn't make it the rule. Someone like Roderick, coming from a family tree that is more of a blade of grass, and never having anyone to quell his outrageous superstitions about an evil house hell-bent on cursing his lineage, might be subject to a maniacal theory that his family home is alive and trying to kill him.
Wrong, sir. Wrong.
Even his sister Madeline returns from the dead and begins to strangle him, and that can be explained away logically. As in the time period, many people were buried alive by accident, since medicine wasn't as advanced as it is today and diseases were fairly rampant. Many would get sick and go into a sort of deathly torpor, and the physician would declare them dead. This is why so many graves in those days had bells attached to them, so if a person woke up buried alive, they could pull on a string attached to the bell above ground and ring it, indicating to whomever that they were still alive. When Madeline supposedly dies, Roderick does her no such justice, but instead chalks it up to the cursed house taking yet another usher to their fate, then proceeds to brick her up behind a wall in their family crypt, not even once considering that perhaps he should leave her a bell just in case. Of course, the nameless narrator could have considered maybe suggesting leaving her a bell, but by the time all this transpires in the story, he too is being affected by the curse. But is it really a curse? Or has he just spent way too long with no one else to talk to but Roderick, isolated in an increasingly decrepit home, out in an unnamed swamp? The Finches are a little bit more cut and dry, in the way of the fact that video games are a visual form of media, so it's easier for the player to deduce what might really be going on since they have their eyes and not just their imaginations.
2,
What Remains of Edith Finch is a more modern style game, with terminology that is easier for people of the past 4 decades at least to be able to grasp. Not everything is laid out plainly, of course, and the fates of some of the Finches aren't said directly, but instead left up to the imagination. Barbara Finch is one in particular that if one is paying enough attention, they can figure out what happened to her. Yet the game never just flat out states what happened to her. Grandma Edie is another one that the game doesn't hold your hand with, but all the clues are there in understanding her fate. Unlike Roderick Usher, Grandma Edie accepts the curse and never attributes it to the family home. She isn't a shut-in like Roderick, nor are the Finches inbred. What commonality between Edie and Roderick boils down to is this shared desire to remain in their ancestral home, regardless if it kills them or not.
This is fine.
I did point out that in What Remains of Edith Finch, that the home the game takes place in is more or less the crypt that lies in the House of Usher, or like it, and that's because it is. Every room is a mausoleum in dedication to a fallen Finch family member, making the house more of a family tomb over a home for the living. The real cursed house is the one that sunk beneath the ocean when Odin failed to reach the States. The final mention of Grandma Edie is when she talks about returning to the sunken home, saying how the tide of the ocean had gone out like never before, allowing her to return to her fallen home, her real home. It can only be surmised that the tide hadn't really ever gone out enough, and that Edie, perhaps in a fit of madness, swam to her demise.
The ocean is a soup!
There is plenty in What Remains of Edith Finch that explains away a supernatural curse, with themes of neglect and dementia that could have easily caused each of the Finch's untimely deaths. Molly Finch, for example, is so neglected that she's suffering from malnourishment, and as a result, she eats mistletoe berries, which are poisonous. Sadly, this leads to Molly's end, but it doesn't mean that it's a curse that caused it. Parents and family that are too busy with their own personal wants and desires are what's to blame for her demise. There's even a fan theory that Grandma Edie is the one responsible for every Finch death, save for her husband and father Odin. As the theory goes, after Edie's husband Sven died being crushed by a dragon-shaped slide he made, which I should also give a shout out to Sven, because it's one thing to make your kids a slide, but building one that's in the shape of a dragon coming off your home? Some people are just built different, man.
We are the music makers, and we are the dreamers of dreams.
Anyway, all the fame of the dragon slide and Sven's accident gained Edie some fame, even landing her a news article in the local newspaper. According to the theory, Grandma Edie's 15 minutes of fame gave her Munchausen syndrome by proxy. What is Munchausen syndrome by proxy? Explaining all the nuance behind it would make this video longer than it already is.
You're a bit late for that!
The short of it is that some people believe that a person can develop a mental condition where they seek attention at the detriment of others, at least mostly at another's detriment.
Mostly.
There may be some cases where another doesn't have to suffer because of someone suffering from Munchausen syndrome, but I digress, as I don't know of any cases. Those who suffer from Munchausen syndrome crave attention based solely on the fact that they are somehow involved with someone close to them's suffering, while not being the ones who are suffering in the first place. The real-life case study of Gypsy Rose is a good example here, as her mother for years convinced everyone around them that her daughter, Gypsy, suffered from a serious illness. This garnered them attention, sympathy, and most importantly to Gypsy's mother, it got them donation money. Many people donated to Gypsy and her mother money to help with their medical bills and in hopes of finding a cure for Gypsy's illness. Gypsy's mother enjoyed the attention, fame, and money. That so much so that she kept Gypsy ill in order to acquire more of these things. It's an interesting true story that I highly recommend looking into for yourselves, but the point here is what Gypsy's mother did is tied into having Munchausen syndrome by proxy.
Too much. There's too much fucking perspective now.
Now, this is a point of contention for some, however, as not everyone in the psychology field view it as a legitimate mental illness. Whether it really is or isn't a legitimate mental disorder, that's not my reason for bringing it up. If Grandma Edie were really to blame for all the Finch's deaths, then it would be the result of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. The fame she received from Sven's demise would have been her reason to continue hurting her other family members in order to keep receiving attention.
Why are you like this?
It's an interesting theory with some merit, but there are too many variables to make it likely. Sam, Calvin, Gus, and Louis Finch's deaths are good examples of this. As in order for Edie to have been responsible for those, she would have had to have some Lex Luthor level of planning. No, when it's all said and done, both the Finch and Usher families are victims of their own hubris. Could there be a supernatural force haunting and hunting them down one by one? Sure. The story and game are set up that way, while both give plenty of clues that amount to nothing more than human nature truly being the culprit. They are also ambiguous enough to leave room for the unknown. Were the Ushers and Finches victims of their own self-fulfilling prophecies? Or are there things in this universe that single out entire families to make examples out of, reminding the rest of us that in the grand cosmos, we are but grains of sand, waiting for the inevitable cosmic shovel to scoop us up, only to dump us in a black hole in some unknown galaxy.
Time to grow up.
Yeah, they probably should have just gone out and touched grass. But what do I know? If you made it to the end, I want to thank you from my very heart and soul. You mean the world to me, and I love you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to help support the channel and you like this kind of content, then please go to my Patreon link below and, help support the channel. It's not expensive and I don't expect much. Maybe you could be responsible for helping me out with a tank of gas or a cup of coffee. But I thank you all for joining me. Once again, from my very heart and soul, I love you. Y'all come back now. Stay golden.